After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.
You're listening to the Sportsman's Nation Podcast Network, brought to you by Interstate Batteries. Interstate Batteries has been a proud supporter of the Sportsman's Nation since day one. So if you're looking for a battery for your truck, a battery for your trail camera, or literally everything in between, including specialized batteries, stop into your local Interstate Battery retail store and talk with a battery specialist. There are thousands of locations all over the United States. And if you want to find out more about the batteries they sell, the culture, visit their website, interstatebatteries.com. Interstate Batteries, outrageously dependable.
My name is Clay Newcomb, and I'm the host of the Bear Hunting Magazine podcast. I'll also be your host into the world of hunting the icon of North American wilderness, the bear. We'll talk about tactics, gear, conservation, but we'll also bring you into some of the wildest country on the planet chasing bear. Colby and I traveled up to Springfield, Missouri to meet with Laura Conlee, who is the fur bear biologist for the Missouri Department of Conservation, and Missouri Department of Conservation biologist Josh Wisdom, and we talked about Missouri black bears. They're right now in consideration of developing a very limited hunting season in Missouri. We talk about all the nuts and bolts and absolutely nerd out on bear biology in a very interesting conversation. And I want to say, just off the get-go, we say this in the podcast, but for fear of it getting lost inside all the incredible details of bear biology, is that really what's to be celebrated inside of this is that there are bears in the Missouri Ozarks, and they haven't been there in a long time, or there was a stretch of time when they were basically extirpated. And so as hunters, we're not just celebrating or even primarily celebrating that they are considering allowing people to hunt them. What we're celebrating is that they're there. And I think that would be the heart of most people that are hunters, is that it's a celebration of a wild animal living in a place in a time when, habitat is under assault by civilization, essentially. And so that's the celebration. Really great podcast with Laura Conlee and Josh Wisdom. Be sure to check out Northwoods Bear Products. These guys have they've been with us for a long time in Bear Hunting Magazine, and we've used their products all over North America. And if you're going to be baiting bears, it only makes sense to be using some commercial scents. And check them out. Hey, it's the spring bear season's essentially over in most places right now, and so we're already looking forward to fall bear baiting. And so check out Northwoods Bear Products, and check out W Hunting Supply for all your hound-related needs, Garmin-related needs, and these guys also have a podcast. Check out the W Hunting Supply podcast, which is primarily about hound hunting. And lastly, our buddies at the Western Bear Foundation, based out of Cody, Wyoming. These guys are a nonprofit hunting conservation organization, being a voice for bear conservationists, bear lovers all over North America who are also hunters. So check out our buddies and enjoy this podcast with some professional biologists out of Missouri. We're recording. Bear Hunting Magazine podcast. Hey, we are in Springfield, Missouri, and I've got Laura Conlee and Josh Wisdom. Man, it's great that you guys have your names on your shirts.
It helps.
It makes it very easy.
I forget sometimes myself. So, yeah.
And I've got Colby Moorhead, the Bear Tech,
the
with
repeat.
us. Yeah. No, this is. Thank you guys so much for driving down. So, Laura, you are based out of Columbia, Missouri.
Correct.
Which
Yep.
is 2.5 hours from here.
Just about. Yep.
Yeah.
Smack in the middle of the state.
Yeah. And Josh, you're at home.
Yep. We're here at my office here in Springfield. So I'm usually here about every day.
Yeah. Okay. So what we're going to be talking about is Missouri black bears, which is, so Laura, what is your title with the Missouri Department of Conservation?
Sure. So I am the fur bear biologist for the Missouri.
Fur bear biologist.
Yeah.
That's
For
cool.
MDC here. And so bears are one of the species that I work with. And so I work with coyotes, fox, raccoons, all the other fur bears also. But as of late, bears typically take up a substantial portion of my time just with the research project that we've got going on and just everything that's going on with bears right now here.
So do you have, so you're a biologist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have a degree in wildlife biology.
I do, yeah. So I got my bachelor's degree from Northern Illinois University and then my master's degree from Southern Illinois University, where I studied long-tailed weasels. So
Really?
I started out at the tiniest end of the carnivore spectrum, and now here I am working with bears.
Ended up at the top. Yeah, I think there's a few songs about that, starting at the bottom, ending at the top.
Yep.
So your history with fur bears, are you a trapper?
I'm not,
Okay.
and I did not grow up in a hunting family or anything like that. I had always had an interest in the outdoors, and all through, I would say, junior high and high school, my friends would just tease me to no end that I was going to be a park ranger. Tan uniform, tan hat, and they'd find pictures in books and they'd write my name on it and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I always had an interest in getting into some kind of natural resource field, and then kind of through college, kind of honed in that interest on wanting to work with carnivores, and really became interested in wildlife management and how research informs management decisions and things like that. And so the weasel project that I worked on was a state of Illinois funded project. And so it was one of those things that kind of tied into the work that they were doing for the state. And then from graduate school, I ended up taking a job in Massachusetts as the fur bear biologist there. So I was out east for about 8.5 years, working on a very similar job. So coyotes, raccoons, all the fur bears that they had out there, and then inherited their bear project out there. Somebody retired and I was able to kind of move into the bear project. So I've been working with bears at this point for just a little over 10 years.
Okay. That's pretty cool.
Right on.
So you're I think it's an interesting transition going from a non-hunting family with just a general interest in outdoors and animals, and then moving into a place where you're making significant, or, at least contributing significantly to wildlife management decisions and being based in the hunting world. Like, what was that transition like for you?
There was a learning curve there. And during my whole, graduate schooling, I was really lucky that I had a lot of friends who were very willing to take me out, show me the ropes, take me hunting and stuff like that. And then, my husband now basically introduced me to all of.
So he's a big hunter.
He is a big hunter. Yeah.
Okay.
Big deer hunter, big turkey hunter.
Okay.
And,
Where did he grow up?
He grew up in Northern Illinois also, kind of a little bit more rural area than where I had come from. And so he came out to Massachusetts with me and adjusted to hunting public land out there where, it's limited availability and a lot of people packed into a little bit of area and stuff like
Right.
that. And so we'd always wanted to get back to the Midwest, all of our families in the Midwest. And so 2016, we were able to move our family to Missouri. And
So you went from Massachusetts to this job.
Yep.
So
Yep.
this was the fur bear biologist
That's
from
right.
the state of Missouri.
That's right.
So, this is a narrative that I've heard, which I think it's probably true, is that in wildlife management, sometimes we are finding people getting into wildlife management for the states that don't have a background in hunting, and that can sometimes negatively, if they're anti-hunting, I don't know how to say that. Like some people are getting into wildlife management that have negative connotations of hunting. Maybe that's a simple way to say that. Have you heard that before?
I mean, I think that's one of those ideas that some folks have, whether it's grounded in truth. I don't know. I mean, that's not something that I've run into in my career. I mean, and for me,
that's good to hear.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, in the fur bearer world, that was certainly something that was, I wouldn't say a challenge, but an adjustment for working with the Trappers Association and not being a trapper myself. I think they had a lot of questions as to, well, how do you feel about trapping and fur bear management and things like that. And so, I mean, I think, I've relied on a lot of fellow biologists and, hunters and trappers to help, build up that knowledge base and that background and things like that. And for me, my interest is really understanding how, best to manage the resources. And so use the research and monitoring that we have available to us, and then make informed management decisions through that. So
well, that's an incredible story. That's great. That's really cool. Josh,
Yes.
tell us about yourself, man. What you do. And
Well, so I am a Missouri native. I'm originally from what folks call the Boot Hill, so the southeast corner of Missouri. Been hunting all my life. Started out when I was little bitty doing doves and squirrel hunts, and public land hunter my whole life. We don't own any property, so we used to go to where I know you've been recently, the Van Buren Current River area.
Yeah.
So that was where we would go for deer season and turkey
Okay.
hunting. So I mean that was about an hour and a half, 2-hour drive for us. So local guy, but I went to school at the University of Missouri in Columbia.
Okay.
I've got a 4-year degree, wildlife management degree. I don't have my master's. I worked for a federal agency that does wildlife, what we might call damage control, USDA Wildlife Services. I worked for them for 8 years before I came to the department. So during that time, I worked as an airport biologist at Chicago O'Hare. I did that for 3 years. I did a lot of work with urban deer. I've done work with feral hog control full time. I've done industrial bird work. And so kind of the opposite side of the coin of what Laura was kind of talking about. You've got wildlife management as a rule. When you go to a typical school, you know, how can we make more? We need to make more habitat. We need to make the populations grow. Well, doing the type of work that I used to do, especially, you're looking at the opposite. Well, what can I do to make this shrink? What can we make this less inviting? And like, so airport environments, that kind of thing, you know, you don't want a bunch of deer.
You're trying to get them away.
Yeah. You don't want a bunch of deer.
You may not
and
be
geese.
the private land biologist I want coming to my place.
But yeah, so I did that for a long time. And so now with the department, my job titles, I'm a wildlife damage biologist.
Okay.
And, you know, so I don't do law enforcement, but I help private landowners a lot, especially. I'm not tied to an area. I don't do food plots. I don't work on your pond. People generally call me when they have a problem with, in this case, we're going to talk about bears, or you've got crop damage.
Yeah.
Missouri, feral hogs aren't wildlife, but feral hog damage, that kind of falls
That's
in my
a
realm.
big issue right now. Isn't
Yep.
it?
So things like that, all the way up to, hey, you know, we've got a bunch of geese on our golf course here in town. What can we do about it? You know, they're closing our swim beach, that kind of thing. So I'm kind of the opposite side of the coin, but yeah, I mean, wildlife damage, whether it's, you know, actual financial losses, sometimes people just need some talking to, just some education about, you know, that's really not that big of a deal to have a black snake in your driveway or whatever. That's not going to hurt anybody.
Yeah.
So kind of runs the whole gamut of some serious problems to just people need some education.
Yeah. That's great. You know, coming from Arkansas, we have always had a very high reputation of the Missouri Department of Conservation.
We appreciate
I mean, like, for no bias. I mean, when I was a teenager, and I remember my dad took me to Missouri turkey hunting, and I remember him telling me, he's like, Missouri's really good. They manage their wildlife well. And I mean, this was long before media or I had any reason to think that. But so yeah, the Missouri Department of Conservation has a very good national reputation, which you guys would know.
Yep.
I mean, but just
like
for,
I said, I've lived all over the Midwest with different jobs, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana. And I mean, so even as when I was a normal person, quote unquote, I agree. I think Missouri's got a good setup. When you live in other states, it's got a lot going for it.
Yeah.
Yep. National leader, right? I mean, that's what you think of in a lot of cases when you think of MDC and conservation and stuff. So
yeah, that's good. Colby, any questions for him?
I'm just wondering questions? I'm just wondering why we're only doing one podcast.
Yeah, I know. We'll have to do another one about fur bears.
The more I hear, more.
Okay, so when we drove up here, Shepard said, "There's a coon," and he was talking about a coon on a sign.
Mm-hmm.
And I braked and I said, "Shepard, you got to be more clear." I said, "If you see a coon on a sign, you got to say, 'I see a coon on a sign,' because I'll slam the brakes on this truck and we'll have a wreck in downtown Springfield."
I saw a sow coon with 3 cubs in the middle of the day yesterday walking around.
Oh, is that right? I'll be darned.
Out being a coon.
We had one climb up our tree in our backyard, and my daughter was just like, "Huh, all right." And we sat there and watched it for a while. So
yeah, pretty incredible animals. Black bears.
Yeah.
Laura, give me a history, so starting from scratch, like nobody, like just assuming that. Well, let me back up. People don't have a context for bears in the Mid-South. Right. I guess we could call this the Mid-South. Like on a national scale, and especially several years ago when people would hear that I was from Arkansas and was bear hunting, blow their mind. And then when I started, when Oklahoma started hunting bears and having robust bear populations, people were shocked. And I would imagine it's kind of will be the same thing when people start hearing about Missouri bears.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, historic range of the black bear. This is like
huge.
El Primo historic range of the black bear. But so take us back to just your story of or what you know of when they had them, how they lost them, and now we got them back.
So I think, the story of bears in Missouri is similar to a lot of other places that, a lot of it stemmed from habitat loss and unregulated harvest and things like that. But for us here, bears were found throughout the state. You read early settlers' journals and things like that, and they were found throughout forested areas of the state. But by the early 1900s, I mean, their numbers were driven really low. And at that point, the Ozark forests had been logged and there was just large-scale habitat changes. And then unregulated harvest on the animals. And so basically here in Missouri, really by the early 1900s, it was thought that bears had been extirpated from the state.
They just weren't here.
That's right. Yeah, locally extinct.
Yeah.
And there were still rumors of bears, and you'd hear a few reports. In the 50s, we had an instance of, I think there was a bear here, killed, and then another one that was killed. But the question was, are these captive bears that got out? Right? Where did they come from?
Right.
And so for a long time, we really did think that our bear population had been extirpated. And then, as Arkansas Game and Fish had conducted reintroductions in the 1950s and 1960s, and not surprising, some of those bears made their way up this way. And as Arkansas's population grew, we started seeing, an increased number of sightings and stuff like that. And really that started to pick up around the 70s and 80s, where bear numbers here.
So there were confirmed bear sightings in Missouri in the 70s.
Absolutely. And even post reintroduction. So even in the 60s and the late 50s, we did have confirmed bear sightings there. And the thought was that, some of these bears probably just came in from Arkansas, came in from that release.
So it wasn't a reproducing population, or that's probably what they would have said.
That's right. Yeah. And that was the thought at the time, right? That any of the bears that we were seeing were coming in from Arkansas. And so over time, bear numbers just continued to expand. And so we went through a series of concerted efforts to collect sightings on bears and figure out, where were the counties that we were seeing bears? Are we seeing sows with cubs and stuff like that? Right. To really decide, are these just bears that use Missouri as part of their range? They wander in from Arkansas. Are they just young dispersing males that are showing up? And over time, it became apparent that we did have, bears that were established in the state of Missouri. Their home range was in Missouri. They're reproducing in Missouri. And so, as we looked to the early 90s and things like that, bear numbers were steadily increasing at that point. And by, I would say, the mid 2000s, we got to the point where we're like, yes, we have a bear population here.
Resident bear
We've
population.
got a bear population.
So by the early 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, and it was in the 90s. That was kind of the thought at that point too.
Right.
You know, we get reports of sows with cubs, and so it seems that that's the case.
Yeah.
But as time went on, you know, into the early 2000s, especially, the question was just how many. Right. And what habitat requirements do they have here? What types of habitats are they using and things like that?
Right.
And so we really didn't have a lot of that information. And we were relying a lot on sighting reports from the public. That's the best way that you can collect some of this information on a large scale. And so, you know, we looked to those sighting reports, looked at that kind of range, and then updated a bear management plan in 2008. And that really outlined some of the key research questions that we had about our bear population. You know, what is our population level? Where do we see bears? What does their range look like? And what's the ecology of bears in this state? And that's kind of the jumping off point for where we are today, basically.
Yeah. So that started, you guys officially started doing research in 2008.
The research project started in 2010. So the management plan was updated.
So for 10 years you've been.
We've been studying them for 10 years.
Let me back up and ask you a question. So for people who wouldn't be familiar with the topography and kind of the vegetation, I guess, of Missouri, northern Missouri is going to be like Midwest. I mean, like classic
row crop. Open
Midwest.
space, yep.
Yeah.
Fragmented forest that's not super connected.
A lot of agriculture.
That's right.
And then southern Missouri is going to be Ozark Mountains, you know, probably elevations under 2,000 feet, but karst topography, thick eastern deciduous forest. Did black bears range all the way up into the prairie portions of Missouri?
So we did get reports through forested areas. So they probably weren't residing in the prairie portions of the state, but where those forested areas stayed connected, it seems that they would have been occurring in those forest areas. Like,
there probably would have been bears like using the river drainages and stuff, like way even up north.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But the core would have been in the Ozarks.
In the Ozarks, yeah. That really heavily forested area for sure.
Yeah. So let me think about where I want to go from here. So many possibilities here. First of all, let me just say the idea that there's bears in Missouri is incredible. I mean, like when you think about on a macro scale, the population of the earth increasing, the widespread spawn of civilization taking over places, the fact that we've got these large carnivores that are increasing their range, increasing their numbers, is pretty incredible. And I mean, so to me, like I'd heard for several years that Missouri was considering a bear hunting season. They'd been doing research. I knew that, but I honestly wasn't expecting it to become a topic of conversation so quickly. But when it did, I was like, this is awesome news for conservation and our century, really.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you look at black bear nationally, I mean, they are one of the great conservation success stories in so many locations. And so Missouri, you know, we're kind of hitting that high point right now where this is the time that, you know, our bear population is rebounded and it's growing steadily, expanding in range. I mean, all in all, this is a huge conservation success story. And when you look to, you know, black bear distribution nationally, you know, their range had been restricted, again, due to habitat changes and unregulated harvests and things like that. And then over time, you know, throughout the eastern U.S., you know, the southeastern U.S., the western U.S., bear numbers rebounded. And so, you know, we've got these, you know, bear populations that in many places are growing. And like you said, at the same time that the human population is growing too. So that in and of itself presents some challenges, right? You know, but
it's that's the reason we have to manage them.
Exactly.
And I want to talk to Josh about some nuisance stuff later. But, you know, when you I asked Myron Means if he thought this number was legitimate. This was totally off the wall number, but like, you know, I mean, bears don't know there's a border 20 miles south of here that separates Arkansas from Missouri. But what I was thinking about was like this and I don't know if I'll call it mid-south populations of bears, but basically Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's bears in northern Louisiana.
That's right.
You know, they confirmed bears in East Texas.
Yep, Mississippi.
So, like this big spot on the map. I think it'd be safe to say, or you tell me what you think, 10,000 bears. I mean, Myron Means says the Arkansas Game and Fish is now saying, I think that we have 6,000 bears in Arkansas, which I told him on the podcast. I knew that he was kind of holding the cards low. And in Oklahoma, I want to say, says they have 1,500 to 2,000 bears, something in that range. So, I mean, there's 8,000 bears. And then you're not even talking about, that doesn't include Missouri.
Right, that's right.
And I mean, bears are crossing the Mississippi River, going over into Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a buddy that has that hunts on a lease on the east side of the Mississippi River that gets bear pictures on his trail cameras. You know, bears that are coming back and
bears
forth.
in Illinois before reported to us, haven't we? In Southern Illinois.
Yeah.
So that's on the other side of the Mississippi.
That would be you guys bears going over there? Is that right?
We think it's a possibility.
It's possible. I mean, and I don't know that they get a huge number of reports, but
it has happened.
But it has happened. Yeah, I mean, and I mean, if you just look to Missouri, though, we get bear reports north of Interstate 70. So when you're talking about, you know, the dividing line between the state, basically take the Missouri River and it cuts the state in half, and it kind of separates, you know, that southern Ozark part of the state, and then that more. I mean, and there's a transition in between, obviously, but and then that agricultural northern part of the state. We get bear reports north of the river. I mean, we're getting bear reports every year, frequently, from kind of the suburbs of St. Louis, south of St. Louis. And then we've got this tract of woods that kind of crosses the river, crosses Interstate 70, that goes into a couple of the counties, you know, north of the highway. And we've gotten bear reports in there, and you can almost track that bear movement. You know, it's a young dispersing bear, and boom. So they are. I mean, they can get across those things. I mean, when I was out east, we'd see them cross major highways and the Connecticut River and things like that. So their capabilities for dispersal are pretty incredible.
Yeah. Tell me about some of the research. Like, what was the basic research and questions that you guys were trying to answer in the beginning, or still are?
So we still are in the midst of our research project. It's getting to the point where we're wrapping up the project that we're in right now. We've got another year on that project. But back in 2010, you know, really that initial question was, okay, we know we have a bear population here, but how big is it? What is that?
Many bears?
Yeah, how many bears do we have? Because ultimately, you know, that's what everybody wants to know, right? How many bears do you have? And so we started that work in 2010, collaring bears, looking at home range size, did a genetic capture-recapture study with hair snares to get at that population estimate. And so we did that for a couple of years. That's where we got the baseline population estimate that if you had listened to communications, you know, up until 2019, basically you'd hear about 300 bears. Missouri's got about 300 bears, and that's based on this estimate that was conducted from 2010 to 2012. But with a baseline population estimate, you can't tell how fast it's growing, right? It just gives you that kind of point estimate in time. And so then the next question was, well, it seems that we're seeing this range expansion. It seems that from, you know, what we can see here, that the population's growing, but at what rate? How quickly is it growing? So that kind of moved us into the next phase of our research project. And so we've been visiting bear dens basically since 2014, 2015, trying to get survival estimates, reproductive estimates, looking at, you know, what's the sex ratio of our litters, how many cubs survive to age 1, what's the breeding interval that we're seeing, is it what we expect to see? And all of that has been used to develop a population model and feed into that population model. And so last year we were able to, you know, based on all of the data that we've collected essentially since 2010, get to the point where we can say our bear population's growing at about 9% annually.
Okay.
That is, it's a high growth rate. It's not something that is out of norm for bear populations or anything like that. And that's where we get to the estimate of between 540 and 840 bears within the state.
Okay. Guys and gals, sorry to interrupt the podcast, but we would like for you, if you're not a subscriber to Bear Hunting Magazine, consider subscribing to our print magazine. This thing will get mailed to your door 6 times a year. You get to hold it in your hand. You'll get to keep it. You get to read it and give it away. You could read it and use it as kindling this fall for starting fires, whatever you want to do. But this is a real product, and most of the 95% of the content that's in our magazine is found nowhere else, meaning it's not on our website, it's not anywhere. We have monthly columns that cover all aspects of bear hunting in North America. There's no way you could read this magazine or get it for a year and not say that you learned something from it. So, Bear Hunting Magazine, subscribe, check it out, and also check out all our merchandise. We just got back in, Colby wanted me to tell you, we got back in our very popular, what is it, Colby? The tan, what do we call it? The BHM tan trucker hat. And we have one at Realtree Advantage, and the retro bear hunter hat we have in stock as well. Let me go back. I wanted to ask you about the different segments. Like, I've got some questions about bear hair DNA research. So I want people to understand how that works, because it's super difficult to get population numbers on a bear.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because it's a low density animal.
That's right.
I talk about that a lot because people, especially new bear hunters, like and this is the simplest way I know to describe it, is a high density of deer might be 45 deer per square mile. A high density of bear might be a bear per square mile.
Right, and that's high.
Yeah.
Yep.
So first of all, it's a low density animal.
That's right.
It's an animal that wants to, he's not going to be feeding out on the edge of the field in the back behind your house. I mean, usually they're in dense cover and stuff. So it's a hard animal to get a population number on. So these bear snare DNA samples. So you're setting up basically bait sites.
That's right, with barbed wire around it. And
like
so there's
barbed wire like 2 feet off the ground.
Yeah, it's basically so that if the bear crawls under or over it, it's going to collect hair. And so there's a small scent attractant that's set in the middle. And then when you're doing it, you've got folks that check these periodically and then just collect all of the hair samples.
And then they
off of
send it off and get, there were 9 individual animals that came to this bait site.
And then the other thing that they're looking at with that is how many times do you see those individuals too.
Okay.
So there's that capture part of it. So identifying the animal once, and then how many times do you recapture that animal? And so
like in different places?
In different places or at the same place. And that helps you, basically there's some statistical models that you would feed that information into to get you to that kind of overarching population estimate.
And here is my question, and I kind of want to see if I'm understanding it right. Okay, so I want to tell you the way that I understand it, and you guys tell me if I'm right.
Sure.
Okay, so you can't put up bear snare capture sites over every square mile of the Ozarks of Missouri.
Exactly.
So you would be doing topographic analysis of habitat. Like, so let's say maybe you had 50 bear hair sites across the state of Missouri. I'm just making this up. And then you would analyze the data to the hilt, doing all your statistical data. And then you would say, okay, in that type of habitat, we have this many bears, we know for sure. And so are you taking an analysis of the topography, the land, and saying, well, we have 30 times that much good habitat, so we can assume that there's that many bears in this spot?
Yeah, so that's the idea behind it. Yeah. So the part that you look at, it's a spatially explicit model. So you identify the geographic area that you are extrapolating across. And so that's the thing. So you set up the hair snares, and there's different sampling methods that you can use on how you set up the hair snares. And part of the reason we had collars on those bears was to see how these bears are interacting with those hair snares within their home range. What is an appropriate home range size to think about setting up these hair snares within, because that's the thing. You don't want to put all your hair snares into one basket, basically, right? You're not putting it all in just one geographic location. You are spreading it out to kind of get that variability that you would see, and it shows you kind of the range in densities that you would see, and then through the modeling technique, after you've defined that geographic area, then it projects it out to the area that you've set it to, essentially. And one of the things that the hair snare stuff also does, I mean, it's allowing you to get at that genetic information, so that individual information. And we were part of a project that had, hair samples collected in Oklahoma, hair samples collected in Arkansas, both in the Ozarks and the Ouachitas. And so looking at, how did those lineages link up? How are they changed? And one of the things that we found was that it seems that Missouri did have a small remnant bear population.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that
cool.
genetic
cool.
work indicates, that there was a small population here that must have hung on in the most remote parts of the Ozarks and just lived at just really low numbers for a long time. Yeah. And then as that Arkansas population increased, now you've got that kind of growing.
You would be able to differentiate that because the reintroduction of the 50s and 60s was bears that came out of Canada and Minnesota. Yep. So they had so there was new stuff.
Right.
I mean, you were finding new genetics.
It was right. It was a distinct signature, basically.
Yeah, I think that's significant.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I mean, I think that, it's one of those things that it kind of falls back onto that secretive nature of these animals, when you talk about, I mean, we get a lot of bear sightings, but does that equate to population numbers? No. And that's why we don't use bear sightings to estimate the population, because, bear sightings typically occur closer to where humans are going to be. It's not in the deepest parts of the woods where we know we also have bears. And, but we can look at that information to see how that range is expanding, because one of the challenges here is that, we've got this growing bear population where we haven't had bears in any number in decades. And for sometimes in folks' lifetime, they've never had to think about bears occurring where they live. And now that's what we're running into, bears expanding into areas, around Lake of the Ozarks and south of St. Louis and things like that. So, we've got a lot of good habitat here, so there's a lot of room for them.
A lot of room for them. I think this is what I experienced in Arkansas, is that, especially in the hunting culture, is that there was a cultural disconnect from hunting bears because they just weren't here. Mm-hmm. Like, you go over into the Appalachian Mountains, East Tennessee, and those guys have been hunting bears nonstop since a long time ago.
That's right.
And then, like, in Arkansas, would have been here. I mean, like, we would have had this, like, rich hunting history. I mean, the literature in Arkansas, and I'm sure it's the same way in Missouri, I mean, there's all this incredible stuff about these bear hunters, and some of it not so incredible in that they were market hunting and, like, not wisely using the resource. But aside from that, all these incredible bear hunting stories. And then it quit because they killed all the bears out, landscape level logging, all this. And then so there was like this 70-year period where there was nothing. And then all of a sudden there's bears.
Right.
And so what I feel like has happened in Arkansas, and it hopefully happens here, is there's a resurgence and kind of of bear hunting, but also kind of that fitting into the hunting culture. And what I saw in Arkansas was, as bear numbers started to increase, there was the deer hunters didn't like them necessarily sometimes. And I saw that as I was like, man, this is an incredible wildlife resource. What's the disconnect here? Like, and I think it was because there was this long gap where they weren't there. Yeah. And so there was no value placed on them. And I don't think that, I feel like we've moved past that even as a hunting. I don't think you're going to experience that. I'm not saying you're going to experience that here, but it's just an interesting kind of, I like to understand the hunting culture and how things, kind of come about.
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Laura's got a lot to say about the research stuff, but exactly what you're talking about in Missouri, my dad didn't bear hunt. My grandpa didn't bear hunt. My great-grandpa didn't bear hunt. There's a deep deer hunting culture. Everybody knows that. So in Missouri, a state that doesn't have a bear season, you've got guys that, well, they eat deer fawns, or, well, they hurt my deer feeders. And so it's like, it's a big thing out there that I can't hunt. It breaks my stuff. And
it devalues the animal.
And so that's part of the whole culture. It's like, well, what good is it for then? Right now, it's just a liability, which people, I'm not saying I see it that way, but people see that way, and it's understandable. But yeah, there's definitely an education that needs to occur.
Yes.
There is, and bears are one of those species too. You know, we talk about them being charismatic megafauna, right? They're big and they are oftentimes symbolic for people.
Right, yeah.
And so there's a whole, different set of values that get placed on them by different individuals, right? There's this, you see this whole spectrum of emotion when we talk about bears. And, some of it is, like Josh said, that, the kind of disconnect. I don't want them here. There's a lot of people that are afraid of them, right? It's a big animal, and they just don't have that understanding of what the animal's doing, and so there's that fear all the way to, for a lot of folks, there's that intrinsic value, just the fact that they like to know that there's this wild animal, even if it doesn't occur where they live. Hey, it's part of the woods there, and so I think that also is one of those big challenges with a recolonizing bear population, right? It's not ingrained in folks to think about bears and to think about the value they have in the ecosystem, and the fact that sometimes that means changing your own behaviors so that you're not creating these situations with human bear conflicts and stuff like that. So it's, here in Missouri, like we talked about, this is a huge conservation success story, but that doesn't mean that it's without challenges, right?
Yeah.
It's, there's always challenges with that, and bears are a large species, and so the management program here, it's multifaceted, and it aims to address all of those different components that you can talk about when it comes to bears.
Yeah, well, I think the main, what I've seen with the hunting seasons in Oklahoma and in Arkansas is it gave people a vested interest in a resource, and it added value to it. And inside the North American Model of Wildlife Conservation, that has been the key, is to it's been that, oh, wait a minute, this is our resource, and we're going to be able to, with backed scientific research and management, we're going to be able to utilize that resource to some degree, and all of a sudden that creates value.
That's right.
Yep. And that's a hard thing for some people to understand that don't understand hunting and don't understand North America in our hunting. But it's so true. I mean, it really is. If something is valued, if somebody has a reason to value it, and the thing about a bear is nobody sees them unless you're looking for them, or you've got one that's causing you trouble.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, they're either causing you trouble or you're looking for them. That's the way you see them.
Right. And that's, we tell folks, sometimes we'll get reports of, it's like, I was hiking and I saw this bear cross the road, and oh my gosh, this was the coolest thing I've ever seen. And we're like, yes, enjoy that sighting, right? And enjoy it, because honestly, you may never see one again. And sometimes it's just, you're in the right place at the right time for that. And it's trying to show the value of that species being here in the state.
Let me ask you a question related to that. I like it. This is a fun question. You've been in Missouri 3 years. How many bears would you have seen without
the research project?
Well, yeah, I mean, just like with you, just like driving around the back roads. Would you have seen any?
No, probably not. Especially not where
you hadn't seen one just cross the road.
That's right. I mean, I live in the central part of the state, right? So we don't have very many up that way. But I mean, even just in all the driving around the back roads of the Ozarks that we do for the research project, I think I've seen one that has gone across the road, and we're like, oh, hey, there it goes. I mean, and it's the same thing. Even when I was out in Massachusetts, that bear population out there, it's a dense bear population. It's about, I think the estimate when I was out there was just over 4,000 bears. And so it was a very densely populated bear population. And I would say I probably had one or two instances, but I was out doing field work where I would expect to see them. And then all the other times where, it was when I was looking for the bear that I found it. So it is, it just gets to that kind of secretive nature.
I always say that if I wasn't looking for bears and was just in my natural wanderings, I probably would have seen 5 or 6 bears Just like crossing the highway, crossing the road, bumping into one.
I've seen one.
Okay, I was going to ask
before
you.
I worked on bears, but I was doing full-time pig work, trapping feral hogs. And so again, I was in a lot of places people don't spend a lot of time, but I saw one cross the road on my way to Piedmont, and I got a picture with it on my, but yeah, I've seen one. It's just crossing the road, being a person in Missouri.
And that's what it's hard for people to understand. It's like, well, if we've got all these bears, why don't we see them?
Right.
You know, they're just a different kind of animal. And that's what makes them cool, I think. Your den research. Tell me about your den research. How many sows do y'all have collared in Missouri?
So right now, I think we're probably at about 28 sows, 30 sows, something like
Quite
that.
a few.
And so, so
are you in charge of all that?
Yep. So I oversee the research project and then work with a huge number of other MDC staff that participate in the research project. So, Josh is one of those who helps during the trapping season. He helps during the den work. We've got regional staff down here that put in tons of effort on the research project. So it's led out of Columbia, but it's a team effort. And most of our work is down here in Southwest region and the Ozark region of our state. So, but we've got, I would say, probably about 30 bears that are collared. And we kind of have them distributed across the southern part of the state. So we've got bears essentially just a little bit east of here where we're at in Springfield. And then bears that kind of go all the way almost up to the Current River in the eastern part of the Ozarks. So a pretty wide range. And in doing that, we cover a lot of different habitat types. We cover a lot of different levels of forest fragmentation and sizes of these forest tracts that the bears occur in. And so each year we go out and we pin down their dens based on the collar signal. When we can find them, right? So again, bears are secretive, and when they den, they're even more secretive.
Does GPS not pick up as much if they're down in a hole?
That's right. Yeah. So the collars that we have used historically have been GPS collars where they store the points on board, and so we have to find the collar to get with an aircraft to get the points from it. And then we do have some satellite collars. So those transmit the locations back to the satellite, and then we can see them, with a lag time, we can see where that bear was. But when you get a bear that goes into, as you mentioned, Ozarks, karst topography, we got a lot of holes in the ground and a lot of caves, and then, a lot of big brush piles and down trees and stuff like that. So when they're in any substantial amount of cover, the signal is just not that great sometimes. So you
don't always find them.
We don't always find them, no. And we do spend quite a bit of time looking for them so that we can find them in the den. And a lot of times we chalk it up to, okay, they must have gone in a little bit before we were looking, or we just weren't looking in the right spot. And, it gets tricky. There's a lot of areas that don't have substantial road access. And so, that's areas that bears like to use. And when they're down in those deep draws, if you're not in that draw just right, you don't pick up the frequency and stuff. So we try to den as many of them as we can, visit as many of those dens as we can. And we'll go in, we'll immobilize the sow. So we use, primarily we use a jab stick. So it goes up to 12 feet long. And we have, the tranquilizing drug at the end of it in a needle. And so we'll walk up to the den, jab the bear, get the sow down. For some of our more open dens, we have to dart them. And Josh has a really good darting story of a bear. You don't think of bears in ground nests, right?
Right. Yeah.
But we do find them in that where basically, they've just made a bowl of leaves, and that's what they sit in.
Just laying out in the open.
All winter long. And so those bears,
crazy.
They're challenging to get because you can't walk up to them in that. They're awake enough that they know you're there and everything. So in those instances, we dart them, and Josh was one that belly crawled for.
Oh, so you're not talking about the one I did this winter, the one last
winter, yeah.
So we have two stories.
There's a couple of them.
I thought you were going to say you put up a tree stand.
And, I belly crawled, what was it, 40, 50 yards
Probably,
to one?
Yeah.
This is not really relevant, but There was a bear in an open den, and she knows you're there. She can see you, and so I belly crawled just to not make much disturbance, and she watches you the whole way. And so I finally just kept putting like a big oak tree.
She was like, "Why is this goober?"
Yeah, it's like,
she'd get up and look at him, and then
yeah.
kind of turn around and sit back down, and then she'd look back over her shoulder like, "Oh, he's still
yeah."
there."
That's kind of the thing. It's like, it's like, how much am I going to tolerate? Am I going to put up with? And so finally, I got as close, which I think it ended up being about 22 yards, and that's important for the trajectory of the dart.
Yeah.
And so I keep a rangefinder and all that. But anyway, so finally I pushed her as close as I could get, and then she finally stood up, which was perfect because it gave me that front shoulder shot. We like to put the darts in muscular, so either basically their rump, the backside of them, were like the front shoulder. So So anyway, we darted her and she ran off. And
she have cubs?
She did.
Yep.
Oh wow.
Yep. In an open den like that. Yeah.
The bad part is you got to bring them back. So she gets darted, then she runs away.
She runs off.
So then we have to carry her like a wounded soldier.
How
you got to
far
carry her.
Did you get away from
200 yards.
Yeah, I'd say about 200 yards. Yeah.
She left the cubs.
Yeah, and they'll do that sometimes. So a lot of it is kind of, there's this idea, I think, that they're drawing the danger away from those cubs, and so I've had it where I've had bears get up and walk around the den, and they're hoping that that's enough for you. You don't want to be by them, right? And they're hoping that you move off and everything. And then you have others that just stay put and they don't move. And you see every level of tolerance with the bear. And I think a lot of it just depends on, the type of den, individual bear, all of that. So
different strategy for each bear, maybe.
Yep.
So describe for somebody that wouldn't know about, how a bear would react, because a lot of people would be surprised to hear that a bear would be awake in a den,
right?
Because like I spend half of my life talking to people about how bears don't hibernate. But I want to hear.
Well, and Laura's about 5 foot tall, and she crawls in there and with that 3 foot stick. So people don't believe that when we say.
It's usually longer than a 3 foot stick, but no, it is. So so everybody thinks, you have this picture in your mind from what you were told as a kid, right? You read all these stories about
bear goes in a cave.
Bear goes into a cave, and then they just sleep all winter and they hibernate and things like that. And so, bears aren't true hibernators. So they do go through like a huge amount of physiological changes. So when they're getting ready to go into the den, during the fall, obviously they're packing on as many pounds as they can get. They're in that period of hyperphagia where they're literally spending all the hours that they're active feeding. That's basically what they're doing.
Yeah.
And that enables them to go through an entire winter without eating, but they're not in the same kind of body condition that a true hibernator would be. And so we have true hibernators here. There's chipmunks and woodchucks and certain types of ground squirrels that are true hibernators. And so
they would just be totally out.
Right.
Body temperature drop. There's a definition for hibernation.
That's right. Yeah. The body temperature of a true hibernator drops very close to the ambient temperature, which is pretty incredible.
Heart rate
drops significantly down. But those true hibernators, they go through these periods of wakefulness, and then they eat a little bit, and then they go back into that hibernating state. And so it's very different than what bears do. And so bears, as they're preparing to go into the winter den, they pack on as many pounds as they can get. And then when food starts to become short, they'll consume roughage and hair and create the fecal plug that's basically going to stop them up.
I've never heard that. They eat their own hair.
Yeah. I don't know that it's something that it's done a ton, but it's basically, I think they're grooming themselves a little bit. They're eating all that roughage. When we find those fecal plugs, it is just a hard mass of stuff, it's I think whatever they can come across that's going to do the job for that. And so, they go into that winter den and they become inactive, but their body temperature really doesn't drop. It stays pretty stable. Their heart rate slows down, but it doesn't go down to next to nothing. But it does slow down a lot. So I think it's like 8 beats per minute that they have in the den. So it goes down.
Slow down.
It goes down a lot, but they can rouse instantly. So with a true hibernator, if you catch them in that deep hibernation state, you can't wake them up. They have to basically warm their own body up and go through certain processes and stuff. Bears, on the other hand, and we see it with experience with the den work. You walk up to the den
awake.
And they're looking at you, and they can get up and leave at any time they want. And sometimes they do it at full speed, so they can be active right away.
And bears aren't obligate dinners. The only one that's an obligate dinner would be a sow with cubs.
That's right.
Like they are going to den, but I say that to say bears are not denning based upon cold temperature. They're denning based upon food availability.
Shortages, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, they'll eat until they run out of food and then go den.
That's right.
And so years with good mass crop, they're going to stay out longer.
Absolutely.
They might get up more. Is that, I mean, like out of the den and maybe go wander around on a sunny day in January.
Yeah, and so that's the thing. It's right. The females give birth in the den, and so those are the only ones that have to den. If they're going to give birth, they have to be in that winter den.
Right.
And so they give birth in the den. But females with yearlings, females that are by themselves, so they didn't reproduce or they're too young to reproduce, or males, they can stay active for a really long time. And I mean, and eventually, in most places, you get to the dead of winter and food just becomes too short, and it's not worth the energy cost to keep searching. But in warmer climates, that period can be really short. And then if you have bears that live around, urban areas or suburban areas, they don't necessarily need natural foods. They will rely on, bird feeders and trash and things like that. And that helps them even stay active longer than maybe they would have otherwise. But when they go into that den, their body is basically like a recycling system. And it's pretty incredible to think that they can go in this den, and especially when you think about the females that are going to give birth in the den, and especially in more northern climates where they might den upwards of 6 months.
Yeah,
they're not eating and they're not drinking that entire time, and so they have a certain type of fat in their body that they burn, and that's what gives them the energy to basically maintain their bodily functions. The heart and the breathing and their brain functions and things like that. But as they burn that fat, any waste products that are created, they're not urinating and they're not defecating in the den. So those waste products are recycled, and it's thought that that's what replenishes their muscles and their bones, because when they come out of the den, I mean, if you or I laid inactive for even a week, our muscles would atrophy, your bones become weak, and for any more extended periods of time, that's the challenges that people face, when they're hospitalized for extended periods and stuff.
Right.
Bears don't see a weakness in bones or a decrease in muscle strength and things like that. And it's because they've basically got
Are there other mammals that have similar, that go into, is it torpor? Is that what they call it?
Yeah.
So
there
there's some other mammals that do that?
There are. So, I mean, some of the other fur bearers, you think, they go into these periods of winter inactivity, right? But it's not necessarily to the same degree as
bear
bears
has
do.
Bears, pretty specific thing that
they
they're doing
do,
with the recycling of the waste and stuff.
Yeah. And it's one of those things. I mean, there are other species that can be inactive for extended periods of time.
But they're the only ones that can go for that extended period of time without.
And they're adapted to give birth in the den too. So when you think about that, they've got, so they go through delayed implantation, right? The breeding season occurs in June and July.
Yeah.
So it's our go-to in any awkward moment in any conversation in my life. I go, do you know about delayed implantation?
But it's one of those things. I mean,
I wasn't trying to stop you from telling us that, so you can tell us that whole story.
It's all good. But I mean, that's basically, they've got this process, and there are other species that have delayed implantation. So weasels are one of them. Apparently, that's my connection between weasels and bears right there. But
because they're a low density animal, usually
they are a low. Yeah, they're a low density animal, and I think it's in a lot of cases it's animals that might experience food shortages.
Okay.
And so for bears, basically if they don't go into the den in good body condition, that embryo doesn't implant, the pregnancy doesn't continue. And part of that is that adaptation, basically, to make it through those 6 months. Because, if you have a sow that's expending the energy, giving birth and rearing the cubs and nursing them in the den while she's not consuming anything, if she went in really poor body condition, there's going to be kind of a trade-off. Something's going to have to give.
I just learned something that I'm adding to my repertoire of knowledge of delayed implantation. Food shortage. See, I thought it was just that. Well, I mean, I knew that their body didn't decide that they, gestated until I understood all that. But I thought it was also or primarily a function of them just needing to breed when they could, because they've got such a big window of breeding, and usually breeding determines conception date, but with a bear it doesn't matter. So they have this big window. So that's good. I like that. The food, it's animals with potential major food shortages.
Yeah, and it's that adaptation to kind of get through that. And I think too, with delayed implantation, there's not I don't know what the trigger is. And I think that's one of those questions as to like, well, what is the trigger itself that, the body signal that the embryo can implant, and, who knows if it's hormone related or, something along those lines. But I mean, just the bear's physiology is something that's a really fascinating system. And so, but that is the common misconception that everybody thinks, well, like, yeah, I mean, you're going to walk up to a bear den, but they're sound asleep. Big deal, right? And it's like, well, not exactly. They generally aren't asleep. I mean, I've worked bears in deep snow cover on really, really cold days where they are a little, they're out, and they're not really paying attention. But then, on warm days, we could come up to the den and the bear's raking leaves into the den to build up the nest again, So, I mean, it just depends on, the day. But especially here in Missouri, I mean, our bears are generally very well aware of the fact that we're walking up to them.
Have you ever had any close calls with a bear on a den study? I mean, like...
nothing that I would say close. Well,
you know what I'm thinking.
Josh is laughing. This year, I got bluff charged in the entrance of one, and I mean, and it does happen occasionally that they do that. I mean, it's not uncommon for them to swat the jab pole away, which is why in a lot of cases, we weigh do we dart the bear or do we jab the bear? If it's something where I think I'm going to make the bear stand up and move because I'm walking up to it, then those are the instances where we think about, okay, is it a clear dart shot? And I mean, many of the areas in the Missouri Ozarks are thick cover and blackberry patches and things like that. And so in those instances, not necessarily the best darting location because the cover is so thick and there's just not a clear shot and stuff. So we kind of weigh all of that as we're approaching the dens. But we've had them where they swat the jab pole, and in a lot of cases, they just turn away from you, and it's they're kind of giving you the rear end. They're not looking at you. They're not wanting to pay attention to what you're doing. Right, and in that case, it makes it easier to jab them in that instance. And then we run into some dens where they're so far back in a cave, we can't reach it. It's one of those things where a lot of these caves lead to underwater areas or, underground water reservoirs and stuff like that. So we're not going to take a chance and immobilize a bear where there's a chance that it could go further into the cave where we can't watch it and stuff like that.
I think an important thing to add, though, this will just get rid of some rumors people see on TV. If we inject drugs into a bear, it might take 20 minutes for that bear to go down.
Especially in the winter.
So that's one of the things where, if the bear is in a cave and, we can only see 10 feet in it, well, we can jab that bear with the drug. It can be awake for 20 minutes. It might walk 100 yards down into the earth. And then, so it's not good for the bear. It's not good for us. And so situations like that, you got to pass.
Right.
Yeah.
But the one that Josh was talking about this year, we had a bear that was in an old slash pile. I mean, the land had been cleared for pasture, and there was a big kind of dozer deck, and it was really old, and so pretty unstable in some spots. And it took us a really long time to just figure out within this huge pile of, what were standing trees at one point, where the bear had created kind of this den within.
So you couldn't find it even in the pile of brush.
Oh yeah, I mean, we for the longest time we figured, okay, we could pinpoint like where, I guess, geospatially within the pile she was, but how she was getting into the pile. I mean, it was like detective work. We're like, okay, I see grass clippings over here, because they'll bring leaves in, and when there's no leaves, I mean, if we have bears that are, in this instance, it was surrounded by pasture, they bring in pasture grass, and that's what they make their nest out of. So
they'll gather it up and move it.
Yep, they'll move it. So we could see some clumps that kind of led to the area where we suspected she was, and so. We got up to her, finally figured out where she was, realized that the way she was coming in, just with the stability of the pile, probably wasn't safe for us to walk in that way. So I kind of said, okay, if we're gonna try to get at her, we have to get her the other way. That's going to require some saws. We're going to have to cut some of these logs just to be able for me to squeeze in. And so we got to the point, and bears pop their jaws when they're uncomfortable, right? And so in some dens, they'll hear us come in 15, 30 yards away, and they're already popping their jaws because they're just letting us know they're not happy about it. Others never pop their jaws the entire time that we're there. It just kind of depends. But this bear, we kind of cut out the logs away, I weaved the jab pole into the opening, and she basically had within this brush pile, there was an earth platform that she was on, but it was a long tube that led to where she was. So she kind of had this just hollowed out area within this brush pile that was basically the length of our jab pole. And so I kind of hung in upside down, had the jab pole kind of swinging above my head, and tried to get everything ready, laid the flashlight on the bottom so I can, identify my target, make sure I'm jabbing where I'm comfortable jabbing and everything like that. And I could see her cubs, where she was at. And she kind of turned her body and squared up a little bit with the opening, which is what they do. I mean, a lot of times they'll do that. And then that's when we jab them in the front shoulder. We can get them in the pectoral muscles if we have to. And so I remember looking at Josh and I'm like, I think she's squaring up at the entrance. And I was like, all right, I'm going to go for this. And I'm hanging in and I'm dangling at my waist upside down, looking at this bear. And right when I went to jab her, the second the needle just brushed her fur, she came straight for the opening. And there was a log there that she stopped at. And I just remember like chucking the jab pole back as far as I could and coming out. And he was standing there and I was like, she just bluff charged the entrance, but that log stopped her. And so I kind of looked back in, and the way she was squared up again. Like there's no way that I'm going to be able to jab this bear at this point. We're just going to have to let her be, and we'll try to trap her if she needs her collar and stuff like that. But that was probably most.
That would get your heart rate up.
Yeah,
I told Laura I was going to dart her. If it goes south, man. I'll just put you to sleep. So.
Yeah. That was one of those where I went home and told my husband, I'm like, but we had everything under control, and we did.
Do you carry bear spray? Does anybody carry bear spray?
Not for den stuff.
Not for den stuff. No, I mean we occasionally will when we're trapping. Sometimes when we're trapping, we're primarily targeting females. So we still get males that come into the trap, and especially during the breeding season, some of those males are really persistent, especially the big breeding age males, our 350 to 450 pound males. Yeah. So we will occasionally carry bear spray when we know we've got one of those that's just constantly coming into the trap site and stuff like that. But for the den work, we don't. And in that instance, I most definitely would have sprayed myself if I even tried, and so that's where it comes into this, like, it's that cost benefit, just weighing the pros and cons of working the den. So everything that we do, we're not going to do anything that's going to be detrimental to the bear. We're doing everything with the bear's safety in mind. When we handle them, we're constantly checking their condition and making sure that they're not having any ill effects from the drugs and things like that. But even within those dens, then the second part of it is, okay, our safety, is it a pile that we can climb onto when they're in rock ledges?
Sounds like your safety, not Josh. Josh is in the back just watching.
I was just going to grab her ankles and pull her back. One thing I want to say.
I thought that's what you were going to say. I thought you were going to say I had her by the feet.
We've had to grab belt loops and stuff before, but I was going to say a caveat to our listeners here. Don't go into bear dens.
Well, right,
Even if you know where bear dens are,
right.
We have a lot of people besides me and Laura, let's say, are in the hole. We've got 10 people behind us that are carrying things, and we have, between all of us, years of experience of what's normal, what's not normal.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's not normal behavior. And this one incident, we've done 100 that have been completely boring.
Right.
Then you had this one, but again, don't mess with bears. Don't mess with cubs. Don't go in the dens. Even though it's a thing people can do that are wildlife professionals, don't mess with bears in dens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's one of those things too. When you think about disturbance, those bears, they tolerate a certain level of disturbance, and then beyond that, some of them have a lower threshold than others, and you don't want to be the reason you're making them move in the winter when they shouldn't normally be moving and things like that. And we do get the question in terms of our research if this disturbance is bad for them. And the one thing, this type of den work has been going on since bear research has been going. That's
if
right.
That bear is alive the next year, if her cubs survive.
That's right.
So it's
Yep.
So you know that you're not hurting
That's
them.
right. Yeah. And we have, there's, when you think about just bear researchers across the country, kind of the collective knowledge of all the bear biologists that have done research projects like this, and all the university researchers that have done research like this, you can look to a lot of other states, and this is a very common way of monitoring the population. So it's one of those things.
It's a great tool, and it's incredible that bears will let you do it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you think about it, I mean, like there's a lot of small things that could be different that would make that totally
People don't do den work with grizzly bears.
Yeah. That's a great example. I mean, just that a black bear is semi-docile and will let you come up to it. What's the I want to get to Missouri's the management stuff that you guys are talking about. I saw the survey the other day that you guys put out. I thought was really good. So I want to get to that. But before that, what's the biggest legitimate bear that you guys have weighed in Missouri?
It wasn't while I was here, so it was before I started, and I want to say it was around 545 pounds, 550 pounds.
I was thinking it was 506 or
something like that. It was just over that 500 mark. But remember, we're trapping it was the summer. Yeah.
It's bigger. In the
so
fall.
we're trapping these males in basically when they are probably at their lowest weight. So this time of year right now we're doing our bear trapping, and we've had, in our traps we use they're trailer traps. They're basically giant welded boxes. And our big males, like when we get up there, one of the reason we have to kind of assess the weight to figure out how much drug to give the animal. And a lot of that comes with experience. We've worked a lot of bears, so we can look at them. But when we get these big males in the trap, you kind of look at are his shoulders touching the top? And those really big boars, their shoulders touch the top. And then how low is his belly to the ground, right? Like how much light can I see underneath his belly? Because, a 4-year-old male can be really lanky, really tall, but they just don't have the meat on them. But those big boars, and we've worked some that are between that 350 and 400 pounds in June, so before the berry crop has really kicked in. So those bears are going to be big in the fall.
Yeah. That's
with the den study. How often does a female go back to the same den, or do they hop around year to year?
It's variable, but so we've had one bear in our study that used the same den 3 years in a row. And she was actually an even more interesting story. We had her with newborns 1 year, we had her with yearlings another year, and then we can't work the den, it's in a cave, so we just put up cameras. She actually had what appeared to be her 2-year-olds with her in that den, which is not something that is
she denned with them 3 years?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so she gave birth in the den, and then when they were 1, and then when they were 2. So 3 times. And I kind of, it wasn't something I had seen before in the work that I'd done. And so I kind of inquired around, and it's been seen in a couple of other states, but it's definitely not something that is very common. And so for whatever reason, she didn't run them off like she normally would in the spring. Or she didn't breed, and then she was just tolerant of them. I've had sows where they have newborns, and then their 2-year-old is in relatively close proximity.
That's why I was going to ask if you'd ever seen a yearling in a den with a newborn cub. I think I'd heard that
it does
before.
happen. Yeah, not since I've been here, and I don't think that's something that we've seen here. But the idea behind that is that, if a sow loses her cubs during the breeding season, she'll go in estrus and she'll breed again. And so the thought is that in some cases, it might be that for whatever reason, the sow and cub got separated for a long enough time period. She got bred, and then they connected back up.
Wow,
and then
what a story.
now you've got that.
Story of reuniting with mother.
Prodigal son has come home.
But it's definitely not something that happens very frequently. Yeah.
Before we get to really what we want to talk about, nuisance bears. Like, what's the temperature of nuisance bears in Missouri?
So beauty's in the eye of the beholder. We'll put it that way. We get everything from people calling because I saw a bear in my backyard and you need to come get it. Well, that's not going to happen. All the way to I've been on 2 landowners' properties this week that have had beehives that have been flattened, demolished, eaten by bears.
Classic.
Yep, classic. And it's the same thing that we've talked about before. People that I've lived on this property in such and such county since 1972, and I've had bees the whole time, and I've never had to put electric fence up. Well, today you do. And there's going to be more bears next year than there are this year. And so it's just
especially if you keep feeding them honey.
If you keep feeding them honey, and as you know, they like the larvae, they like the broods. There's more than just the honey. So there's that. We get literally everything under the sun. We get your common bird feeder calls, garbage calls, all across the state. We get chicken coops sometimes, people that still feed pets outside.
When's the prime time for nuisance calls?
Right now. The earliest,
no berries are ripe.
Yeah.
Right.
So the earliest I personally have had is April 1st, April Fool's Day. I've had nuisance calls all the way from April Fool's Day through like October.
Yeah. we see in a lot of places, you'll see, especially if you got a dry summer where you don't have a good berry crop, then you've got bears that are switching to alternate foods. I mean, we had a bear that was grazing wheat at
one of our areas.
Yeah,
that is a very popular hiking trail. So we got a lot of calls. It was sitting in a wheat field, a food plot that we had planted, eating the heads off of wheat, sitting on its back, on its belly, raking it in, and everybody literally pushing strollers, walking by, looking at this bear eating the heads off of wheat.
Wow!
But it was a very dry summer that year, and so he was really not wanting to leave that.
Yeah. And in that summer, we saw an increase in complaints of bears showing up, bird feeders, bears showing up at trash, and things like that. I mean, so we see that kind of fluctuation between years and then within seasons. And the other part of it too is, right now this is dispersal time. Mm-hmm. So those 18-month-olds, those young ones are set off on their own, and the young males, they wander huge distances. And so these are the bears that show up south of St. Louis. And in general, they don't stay in one place for very long, but when they move through, boy, they generate a lot of phone calls because it's like they're in neighborhoods or they're just really in areas where folks are like, wait, that can't be a bear, right? No, it is a bear. And then it's like, oh, okay. And then, and as it moves through, you can kind of track just that one bear. Okay, I think it's over here now, or now it's switched counties, it's over here and it's moved on. And then you couple this time of year with the breeding season, and those breeding age males, they just cover huge ground. So the more something's moving, the more likely it is that maybe it's going to cross a road and get seen and stuff like that. So our bear reports are just, they're rolling in daily, and the vast majority of reports that we get from the public are just sightings. They're not all nuisance issues, right? And a lot of them are just, folks excited about what they saw or seeking more information. Like, okay, this is the first time I've ever seen a bear. What in the world am I supposed to do about that? What do I do? What's your advice? Kind of stuff. And then as Josh said, we do get those instances where, the bear is seeking out those easy food sources and causing damage. And when we look at our, human bear conflicts, the vast majority of them are centered around food, right? It's those beehives, it's the chicken coops and things like that. And then every year we get the occasional bear that will wander into town.
Can't believe I hadn't talked about that. Like the big thing, the probably the most famous one is I have a counterpart in St. Louis, Tom. We had a bear walk inside a church that had the doors open.
Is that right?
They have, I think it's a parochial school or something. So there's people there. So the doors are open for the breeze. And long story short, the bear ended up in the boys' bathroom and couldn't get out because the door shut behind it.
Yeah.
And so my counterpart went in there and darted it in a stall. And we had to, the department, we had to carry it out. But yeah, so that's part of the whole culture thing is I've done a bunch of these where literally a bear walks into town at night, following his nose. Usually it's a 2-year-old male. As the city starts to come alive, that 8 o'clock traffic, people are going to work. Well, then he runs up a tree because he's scared. Well, the tree might be the courthouse square, a playground. Well, now there's news involved because we haven't had a bear in Missouri in 200 years, according to the local people. Exactly. And now it's up a tree. And so, it ends up being, almost a state of emergency depending on the type of people involved. And so that always ends up being its own deal. And sometimes you can just wait till night and it comes down the tree and he walks away. That's the best thing. Every once in a while, we'll get in a situation where it is such an urban center where we'll try very hard to grab that bear, and not that we're going to relocate him, but I'm going to move him outside of town so he doesn't get hit by traffic. He doesn't. We're not making this problem prolonged, and so we do some of those too.
Yeah, and we do a lot of discussion too, about the fed bears, the dead bear, and stuff like that. Because, I mean, even though we have a low density population, we still have bears that show up in town, and we have some bears that get to be very persistent with the food, whether it's bears that are a bear that's continually busting through electric fence to get at bees, and once they start doing that, it's really hard to push them off doing it, and or the bears that are getting more bold and breaking into porches and stuff like that. And it doesn't happen all the time, but it does. And so it just goes all the way, it's that continuous loop of education, because it's, these things are preventable, but once the bear goes down that road, sometimes we get to that situation and, it's not a situation that we're happy about where we have to go in and, or Josh would have to go in and euthanize a bear, but it does happen. And it's unfortunate when it does, but,
Are there times you have to get really creative where you can't get a trap in or the bear just isn't there to
So, I mean, yes and no. We as a department, we do a lot. I personally and the other, there's 6 guys that have my job title in the state, and we all try very hard to help the public with these because exactly, it's like most of the public, it's like you drop these things off from outer space, have no idea what to expect. People don't even know they climb trees. They just don't know what to expect. So we loan out electrical fences sometimes. I've used rubber buckshot. I've used pyrotechnics. I even have an electric doormat. So if you had a bear that was getting on your porch, obviously he's climbing up the stairs. We can maybe stop that before he even gets up the stairs.
I could use that for a prank sometime.
Yeah.
Well, there's possibilities.
That's a great
there's
idea.
possibilities.
Like I say, I didn't invent it. There's these problems are more.
Josh Wisdom, electric.
Like I say, it's actually there's some outfits out in Tahoe. This is a lot more common problem. And so I've dealt with some of those people out there.
Okay.
But yeah, so sometimes you do got to get kind of figure it out. I use a device, actually not really like trying to sell them, but Critter Getter. It's a noisemaker device that has a motion sensor. You can put that over a dumpster. So that generally will scare the bear away, or it'll let the landowner know that now you can come outside and use these noisemakers that we lent you or whatever. So we really try because I kind of reaching back to what we talked about before. If it's just a liability and nobody will even help me with it, it's like, then what's the point of having it here? And so we really try hard to make everybody have a positive interaction, as well as we don't want to put any more bears down than we don't put any down. But yeah, we really try to fix that problem when we can.
Yeah, I think that. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think that kind of gives more shape to what it is you actually do, because it's really teaching the public or private or civilians, I guess, because it seems like you could be. You can go military. I'm just kidding.
Nah.
But no. But just being able to go in and really education is the main thing that you do outside of, and like nuisance and trapping is just kind of the small percentage of the whole
absolutely.
picture.
Yep.
And so I think that would have been a disconnect sometimes inside of my mind. It's like I'm so busy just relocating bears rather than, oh no, I'm going and I'm teaching these people how to do this, do that, and equipping them to coexist.
Well, and that's the thing, and you'll talk to any wildlife management person. Wildlife management is people management. It's easy to plant seeds. It's easy to let them breed and do what they're going to do. But getting the public to change, whether it's deer or bear or turkey, whatever, getting them to appreciate it or change their way of doing business. It's all. Daryl is another gentleman that works with me. He said my time in college as a bartender helped me more than some of my classes because it's learning how to relate to people, how to talk to people and get them to understand. And so yeah, that is a big part of what we do. And again, I think it helps that I'm a local guy. I'm a Missourian, but you got to be able to relate to people and understand that if I lost a $500 beehive and I've lived here for 30 years, I'm a little upset about it.
Yeah.
And rightly so, and so again, we really try to help. And part of that ties back into the research end. I've literally printed off maps from our data and been like, look, let's say I came and killed this bear that's causing you problems. There's not one bear here. Look at this data. There's 5 more bears that you don't know about that are literally walking down this ridge that you've never seen before. We had an incident. It's not important where, but we had an incident where we had an issue with a bear and I trapped it. And that same week while I had this trap set, I had a bear run over on the road that was physical description was the same. I was like, well, that probably fixed my problem. It didn't. I had a trail camera from the neighbor across the road that had a bear picture that was, that's probably him over there. I already had the bear in the trap while all 3 of these things happened. And so I took that to the landowner. I was, look, there was 3 bears that were 250 pounds within a half mile of your house all at the same time. So you need to change the way you do business. It's not that I'm going to kill that bear. I'm going to move that bear. And like I said, Missouri, we don't really have a relocation thing. It's not like Montana. I can't take them 200 miles away and dump them. I could take them to Clay's place and let them go, but he may like that. Yeah. But that's the thing. Most people, they say, well, you need to take that and move it somewhere. And that's like, well, again, I can take it to somebody. I can take it to Branson. I can take it to Springfield. Those people don't like that idea either. And so again, it's going to have to be the populace is going to have to understand.
And that brings us to a good point here. And before I get to this point, I do want to talk about bear home ranges. But the nuisance stuff is essentially a big component of why we have to manage these animals through regulated hunting. Because that's a big question a lot of people have is, why do we hunt bears? Number one, bears have been used historically in this country for forever. And they're great meat. It's a great animal. I mean, so from the wildlife utilization standpoint, it's a sustainable resource. All these things that we know, like us hunting these bears is actually helping their populations in many cases. But the way I describe it is there's only so much suitable bear habitat in Missouri or in Arkansas or in Oklahoma or in Montana. There's only so much habitat. Only so many bears can live in that habitat and maintain their health and fitness and have enough food, have enough space, have enough holes in the ground to den. And bear populations increase by 9% per year in this state. I did the math on the Arkansas population the other day at basically a population that's increasing by 10% per year will double in 12 years.
That's right. Yep.
Something like that.
Yep.
But you've got this fixed amount of habitat that's not growing, that's actually decreasing probably. I mean, if you're talking about private land stuff, habitat. Mm-hmm. And so you've got this large carnivore that's naturally increasing. We need wildlife management through hunting that stimulates so many positive things. I mean, it stimulates families getting out and hunting, people gathering wild protein. It stimulates the economy. These nuisance issues show us places where these bears are essentially, I mean, not always running out of habitat, but I mean, bears dispersing, bears going into places that really we can't sustain a bear there. I mean, there's a little block of woods right over there. A bear probably can't live there his whole life. And so that's why we need to hunt these bears.
Right. And you think about, the biological carrying capacity of the landscape, right? What can the landscape hold? And then the social carrying capacity. What can people tolerate? And so, we see this with a lot of different wildlife species. With deer, I mean, you can have deer increase and increase and increase, but you get to a point where people say, okay, this is too much. And so for bear, the biological carrying capacity of the land is one thing. And here in Missouri, we've got a lot of bear habitat. We've got, our bears right now from our research, they're pretty choosy. They select the highest quality habitat because they can, right? They live at low densities right now. So there's not that competition to get to that high quality habitat. That's what they're selecting for. But we can look to other parts of the country and recognize that bears are super adaptable. And as they continue to grow, they'll use those more marginal habitats. And you could be talking about fragmented forests where you have bears crossing roads really frequently, or that type of fragmented forest where it's, human development or agricultural development and things like that. And so that social carrying capacity tends to be lower than what the landscape could support. And it's just because, there's that possibility of those nuisance issues or the perception of the animals being in close proximity to homes and things like that. And so, I think when you talk about hunting and the ability to provide that opportunity. And so, we're at this point with our bear population where we can look to proposing a hunting season, right? This is a really exciting time for the state of Missouri. We're here and we have a bear population where we can say, yep, we're at this stage now where we can look to that. And so we've established, this proposed hunting season framework, and it's really to provide opportunity. Our population can sustain a harvest, and so we can provide Missourians that opportunity to utilize this incredible resource that they haven't had that opportunity before ever. We've
never had a regulated bear season.
Right. Before there were game laws, they killed bears here.
That's right.
Yeah, that's
so
pretty,
so
cool.
it's like this incredible. We talk about it being this conservation success story, and that kind of gets you to that. And then for us, we have a bear management plan that really identifies kind of the multifaceted nature of bear management. Right. I mean, all the things we've already talked about. We've covered basically everything that you would discuss with our plan. It's education, it's minimizing and addressing those conflicts when they occur. It's the research used to inform those management decisions. And for us here, as our population continues to grow, we'll look to establish those population benchmarks, and hunting will be an essential component of that management program. So, I mean, it all...
What's the general framework for the proposal that's on the table?
So for our bear hunting season, the proposal that we have, so right now, we don't have a season. This is kind of our initial public input phase. So Department of Conservation, in many cases, especially with these types of big changes, this is a big deal, right? This is brand new for us. So we create this proposed framework, take it out for initial public comment. We'll make refinements to it, and then and then send it down for kind of that approval chain that it would need to go through. But kind of the gist of it is we're proposing a 10-day season that would start the third Monday in October. We are proposing zone-specific harvest quotas. So we have kind of proposed 3 bear management zones, zone-specific harvest quotas. And so the season would close either when the zone-specific quotas reached or within that 10 days. We don't have that established yet. So I
assume it would be pretty low.
Yeah, so what we're talking about is a limited and highly regulated harvest. So this is us, basically establishing this hunting season. So
I think
it'd be
Oklahoma
a
had
harvest.
a 20 bear, a 30 bear quota the first year, the first several years.
Yep.
And they started killing like 40 bears on the first day, before they could close the season. But no.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're looking at too is allocating permits for those bear management zones. Okay. So we know with bear hunting success rates tend to be low, right? And I think that in and of itself is an adjustment for folks that have never bear hunted.
Yes.
It is
they
one
need
of
to
those
listen
things.
To the Bear Hunting Magazine podcast.
That's right. You got to understand that success rates for bear hunters are typically low. And, right now we're proposing no baiting and no dogs. And so in that case, success rates will be low. We know that.
They will.
And we can look to other states and see that, in those instances, you're talking about typically a below 10% success rate in most cases. Some states have seen kind of some variability around it, but it's not what you're going to think about for other species that folks might be a little bit, more commonplace to them. So thinking about that permit allocation by zone, those zone specific harvest quotas, and our zones are set up to kind of delineate regions of the state that are kind of separated by major highways. So they kind of take these bear habitat areas that are already kind of separated by these major roadways. And so our bear management zone, that is our southwestern zone. So that would be here where we're at in Springfield. That one is an area where it's got a lot of really suitable bear habitat. We've had bear reports in a number of the counties within the zone for the longest time period. So bears have been established in zone 1 for a long time. And there's some variability within that zone, obviously, because it's dependent on that forest cover. Zone 2 kind of encompasses the largest tracts of Mark Twain National Forest and some of our larger, less fragmented habitat blocks.
Like the Current River and back over in there.
That's right. Yep. And then Zone 3 is an area that kind of surrounds Lake of the Ozarks and Truman Reservoir. And so when you think about that zone, that area, there's a lot of suitable bear habitat there, but bear numbers are low. And so we know that area is an expansion area. We have sows in the area. We have, we get bear reports regularly, but in that zone, it's just a lower density of bears just by default. That's kind of that expansion zone. So dividing it up that way.
When would the proposed season be?
So if it moves through in terms of the MDC process, the earliest we could have it would be October of 2021.
Yeah, so potentially next year.
That's right. Yep.
Man, that's exciting. That's very exciting. In Arkansas, the way all this went down was for years. We had a season since 1980. I'm not telling you something you don't know. I'm just kind of giving a context. We had a season from 1980, and then in 2001. They opened up baiting on private land because the bear population began to expand beyond what the still hunters, we'll call them, could harvest. So they, we needed to take out more bears. So they said, well, we're gonna allow bait on private land in certain areas. But what we're seeing now is guys going back to this
the harder way.
Yeah.
The sheep hunt of the South.
Oh, yeah, I'm giving him 5 right here. If he knows that phrase,
go
then...
with 5.
Yeah, go with 5. Yeah, we'll have to wash our hands. No, yeah. We coined this deep, deep metaphor of sheep hunt of the South. But, yeah, it's a super tough hunt. But so I'm so excited to see how people do. Yeah. And I think in an unhunted population, it'll be easier, Josh. So this is your year, man.
I'm hoping.
Yeah, this is your next year.
I shoot a recurve some too, but I don't know if I'm going to go with, I might take a rifle.
Not as well, dude.
Yeah.
Not as well. No. Such great information. Is there anything bounced around a lot, talked about research, talked about the season framework. Is there anything else that you'd like to? I do want to hear you talk about home ranges.
Yeah.
Like, because that's always fascinating to me. So let me back up. Let me talk to you about home ranges, and then I'll say you can say
Sure.
whatever you want. You too, Josh. You too, Josh.
I can't. Better not.
What's the okay? 2 simple questions. What's the furthest you've seen a bear go, like a GPS collared bear, in all your research go? And then the question is, what is an average
What's normal
for a sow home range and a boar home range?
So we have. We are really lucky in that we've picked up a few really cool dispersal movements with our collar data. So, males you think of, males move huge distances, right? So they move really large distances. We have one that was initially trapped kind of in the Springfield. It was not far from here. It wasn't in Springfield. It was just a little bit northeast of here, but kind of in this area. And that bear, he ended up in Warren County, Missouri, which is north of Interstate 70, north of the Missouri River, basically smack in the middle.
How far is that? Give us some context.
250 miles as the crow flies, I would bet.
Really?
Yeah. And so, and it wasn't just a long linear movement.
Miles.
He basically, he kind of wandered around. And so we put a new collar on him up there and kind of tracked his movements.
So you just turned him loose back up there.
Yep.
You didn't bring him back down here.
Nope. Because we don't relocate him. And in that instance, he's that dispersing bear. And so his thing, he's just going to keep moving. Right. And, there's nowhere that we could put him where he's not going to move. So he went about his business. We had locations of him almost all the way to Cape Girardeau. So now you're talking almost to the Mississippi River that he went. He kind of stopped at the edge of the forested habitat there, turned around. We recaptured him down in the Birch Tree area. So Shannon County, not too far from Current River, Van Buren, that location.
That's a good place for him to set up homestead.
Yeah. And then he denned a little bit north of there. So I mean, when we look at his movements, this crazy
hundreds of miles.
Oh yeah. I mean, I basically just did like a quick measure on Google Maps that if this is from point A to point B to C to D, it was like 450 miles. And there's more in between, right? Because it's not just
I wonder how many
thing.
Missouri citizens saw that bear and called you guys. Or that one bear.
And so interestingly, we can look at our sighting reports. So when he was in that Warren County area, if you look on our sightings map, I think it's like yellow dots right now that were 2011. And
they kind of followed
that.
My
gosh, yeah, there were all these reports of this, of one individual bear and stuff. So they do. I mean, they move these huge distances, but the thought with females is that females don't disperse very far, right? They stick around their mother, and that's kind of their typical dispersal pattern. And so basically what they do is, it's very similar to deer. It's that rose petal hypothesis. So you have a sow. If she has a female cub, that female cub sets up a home range that overlaps some with the mother's.
Okay.
And then her female cubs will do the same thing. And so the female component of a population is a lot slower to expand than the male component, which is why we see males south of St. Louis, why we see more males around the Lake of the Ozarks. It's just because that male subset, is the one that expands a lot quicker. But we've had a couple of long-range female dispersals. So we had one where we were able to see this female. She's collared, and she was I think she was 4 when we had her collared. And she moved basically, it was like 75, 80 miles, something like that. And then kind of hung around the Houston, Missouri area. And then even went further east from there. So she was another one of these bears from the southwestern region and kind of went that direction.
That's probably a phenomena, too, of an expanding population.
Yes, absolutely.
Because if she had went 5 miles and bumped into some kind of bear conflict, it might have turned her.
Right.
So, I mean, these bears are just like heading north and nothing to stop them.
Nothing to stop them.
I mean, in terms of bear stuff to stop them.
No, exactly. Exactly. Other bears, right? Yeah. But that's it. I mean, and so those types of female dispersals, but like those are the little sparks, right, that are going to ignite kind of those local breeding populations there. Okay. So if we have these longer female dispersals, we may get females that show up in some of these areas where if it was just that kind of typical that you would think of population expansion, that you wouldn't see for a little bit longer. And so we kind of see it. So so for all the cubs that we handle, we pit tag them. So little microchips
So
like
you'll
you
be
do.
able to check them their whole
Exactly.
life.
Yeah. And we just caught one that we had handled in 2018 as a cub. We just trapped her 50 miles away.
Really?
Yeah. Totally different
Female.
area.
Wow.
Another female. Yeah. So it does happen. And so we're seeing that kind of expansion
So
of that
the
female
home
component.
ranges, well, I guess we'd have to get into the definition of home range, but what would be just like a general statement for Ozark bears, like square mile? And I realize we can't really talk about home ranges in square miles, but just for general.
We'll do it. Yeah. So we say like 25 square miles is what you would think of as a typical female size average home range. And then recognizing there's that variability, right? So
And that could be any shape.
Exactly.
It's
yeah.
not a square.
It's
It
not a
could
square.
be-
Yeah. It could be oblong along a whole ridge that's that bear's home range for
Right.
sure. And so about 25 square miles for the females. And in some
That's
areas
bigger than what I thought you were going to say.
yeah, but it can be a lot smaller, right?
Yeah.
So they can get down even lower than that. I mean, when I worked on the East Coast, we had bears that had much smaller home ranges. I mean,
Right.
and they
With
were
denser population.
yeah. and a lot of those bears with really tight home ranges, a lot of it's based on food. So they're going to go where they can find food. So if they're in an area with lots of human associated foods, they don't have to go as far to meet their energetic needs and stuff like that. If you're talking about big tracts of forest, sometimes they do need to travel a little bit longer distances to get to, the good patches of acorns and stuff like that, or the berry patches and everything.
Yeah.
So we do see some variability around that. And we did have a young female that was collared around the Lake of the Ozarks area, and her home range was a lot bigger. It was, you'd look at it on a map and it would look like what you would think of as a male's home range. And it's just, she was in an area where, like you said, probably not a lot of bears, not as many bears. And so she really wasn't restricted in her movements and things like that.
What about males?
So males, it varies.
Ozark males.
Yeah, males varies from year, during the time of year, but at the biggest, you're talking about 100 square miles. So just like huge,
Massive.
huge areas.
Now, is that common?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So males during the breeding season, I mean, they'll move really big distances. Yeah.
I wonder how different that would be. I mean, it's been years. Like the research that is in my file cabinet in my head is from the early 1990s in Arkansas. And just from what I've heard biologists kind of just say off the cuff. So, I mean, this isn't like hard science, but like I was thinking that, like a male bear in Arkansas would have like a 20 square mile home range,
and it's totally possible. And so I mean,
with denser population,
you see variability, and a lot of it is food dependent. So if there's variability in the habitat, and there's different types of food resources and things like that, you'll definitely see that variability. And males shrink their home ranges down a lot when it's not the breeding season. We like to describe it for folks, especially this time of year.
It's like the widest points.
This is the biggest they could cover, because it helps explain why they might see them where they're seeing them, and then and then why, if you see a bear here and then we get a report way the heck over here, it could be the same bear, because they can move such big distances. And so I mean, we've been really lucky in kind of catching some of those more unique dispersal movements and stuff like that to see that. So
now that's the longest bear dispersal that I've heard of. What you just described.
He was like a meanderer, just he wandered, basically. He was just a wandering bear, and he ended up dropping his collar before we got to where he was like in an established home range.
So you don't know where he's at?
No, we don't know where he's at now, but from
Josh probably does.
Hard to say.
But from the later years, it did seem like he was kind of settling down, right? So we started kind of to pick him up between, and he may end up being, I mean, this was several years ago. We're still trapping in this area. He's probably got ear tags still, and we may end up,
find him.
We may end up getting him as, one of those 300-pound breeding age males now, because he's kind of reached that age class. So
put another
that's
collar
incredible.
on him.
Jeff Ford in Oklahoma talks about a bear that was going 70 miles in between its summer and fall ranges in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And same story. It lost its collar. And the last time they had GPS on it, it was like 10 miles into Arkansas the other way. It was going into like this like fringy agricultural area in Oklahoma, coming out of kind of this big national forest, like core bear area. And it was going 70 miles. I can't remember it was probably doing that in the summer and coming back to den in the mountains, but it may have been different, but just bizarre stuff.
It's incredible. I mean, and I mean, and like when you collar these animals, you kind of get this insight into stuff that you really wouldn't have noticed otherwise. And then the collar technology right now, when we think about, historical studies and things like that, when you're just using VHF collars, all that collar does is put out a beep, and it's dependent on you finding it and triangulating its location. And so realistic, how many times can you find it each day? How many consecutive days can you find it for how long? And and especially, when you think about bears and the huge ranges they cover, and then the topography that they're in, there's so many challenges there, right? It's hard to do that. Yeah. The collars now, they're like a handheld GPS unit that is basically logging locations. And so our GPS collars, most of them take locations every 2.5 hours. We have some that are doing it every 90 minutes.
You know where it's at.
In really thick cover, sometimes they don't connect with the satellite, and so you can't see some of those things. But you get this incredible, just detailed habitat use. And there's times where you may have a bear that, we usually see her over here, but she's been gone for like a month. And so the question is, did she drop her collar and we're just not picking it up? Did she die? Or did she disperse, or, is she on a walkabout? And so we've had some bears that are down near the Arkansas border that make these huge forays down into Arkansas, and she's gone for the better part of a couple weeks, and then comes back up and is right back to their core range. And, we've seen that with other bears. And so, and it kind of shows you just that connectivity of the population, right? Like you said, bears don't know political boundaries here. Yeah. So, we talk about 540 to 840 bears here in Missouri, but they're part of this larger
there's certainly
population.
Bears that their ranges are overlapping into both states.
Yep, absolutely.
Sure. Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. Okay, so back to the ending question.
Yeah.
Do you have? We'll start with Josh.
Oh.
Is there anything we haven't covered that people need to know that you guys would like to say to people?
Well,
or just anything fun you want to say, Josh?
I'll talk all day, man. A couple things, and we're probably going to be kind of preaching to the choir in this outfit, but a big thing that I like to stress to people is that when I get calls from the public, it's usually people think bears are Winnie the Pooh, or they think it's the grizzly bear from The Revenant. There's no in between. It rips off children's faces, or it's a love toy.
Yeah.
So bears are neither one of those. But bears aren't fuzzy people either. They don't want to be your friend. They have a different life than a human does. I realize they take care of their young just like deer do, just like turkey do. And it's just really important for people to understand that bears need respect, not necessarily fear. They are a valuable resource. It's a good time to be alive. It's a great time for Missouri to have bears. We just opened an elk season. Now we've got black bears, and Laura talked a little bit about intrinsic value. For me, it's neat to know that, I can tell you the place that we're sitting right now, I've had bears 10 minutes that way. If a bear walked through this parking lot, I wouldn't be surprised. And so it's cool from a guy that's a Missourian that grew up they actually grow cotton where I'm from. But, just a few hours away, it's like we have wilderness, which we do have some wilderness areas here, but, we've got black bears and we've got an elk hunt, and it's like, man, that's impressive. It's like, I don't have to drive to Montana or Wyoming anymore. It's like, it's just as woolly here as it is there. And you can literally drive 20 minutes from your house where I live and be right in the middle of it. I just think it's something people need to appreciate, and it's a good time. It's a good thing.
And I think to add to that too, when you think about that, it highlights again, those conservation success stories. And one of the things when you think about, you talk about MDC, the Department of Conservation here being a national leader, and that is only because we have the support of individuals in this state. We have the support of Missouri residents.
It reflects the values of the people.
Exactly. Yeah. And so in looking at, how you have kind of this strong conservation foundation here, it's in the values of individual Missourians that they value conservation. And so, when we think about kind of the resurgence in the bear population and the habitat improvements that have been made. So, you're talking 100 years ago, the Ozark forest looked substantially different, right? So just in that time period, there's been, so many substantial changes and just the level of support that Missouri residents give to the Department of Conservation. All of those, it's an exciting time. It's an exciting time for me as the bear biologist in the state to be part of this incredible program and this incredible organization, but to also just recognize, the long and, very important history that the Department of Conservation's had for the state, and how that has come up from, the residents within this state supporting that,
especially with
conservation
the denning
ethic.
project. Most of our dens usually end up being on private property.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
And so we have to get permission, and sometimes they might tell you no, and that's their right to do it. But we generally get really good cooperation from public.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so there's that.
That's something I didn't talk to you about. Maybe you could just talk on it for 30 seconds. Public land, private land. Like in Arkansas, our core bear populations are on public land. We've got pretty big blocks of national forest. Is that what?
We see both, right? Yeah. So really, the core of our population is a nice, healthy mix of public and private land.
Okay.
And so we have those we've got large tracts of public land. They certainly have bears, but we also have some areas. I mean, especially when you're thinking about kind of some of the locations around here where it's more private land interspersed. That's bear habitat.
Some of your core areas wouldn't necessarily be hubbed around big blocks of public land like Mark Twain and stuff.
They still, many of the cases they still are. It's probably half and half, yeah. So,
okay.
But when we think about the Mark Twain National Forest compared to Ozark National Forest and Washita National Forest, I think that Mark Twain is kind of separated into these segments, right? So they're big segments, and it makes up this.
There's private inholdings and
that's
stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so they could be really living in the Mark Twain, but be on private land. That's
right.
what you're saying.
Yep.
Yeah,
and in some of the areas where we found kind of that remnant DNA, a lot of that was on private land. A lot of, the hair snares that were run on private land and things like that. And we've, in some of the areas, kind of in the south central part of the state, south of Highway 60, but kind of centered in the central part of the state. A lot of our trapping occurs on private land. We have tons of landowner cooperators. Absolutely, yeah. And realistically, like Josh said, we couldn't do the bear project without it, because bears don't know fence rows and they don't know boundaries and stuff like that. So they don't only occur on the Forest Service. So if we've got a dropped collar that's on private land, we need to go pick that up. We always, we don't go on that property without the permission of the landowner, and we have so many folks that are like, hey, I've got bears here. You want to set up a trap? I know your research project. You want to set up a trap and stuff like that. I mean, there's
most people are excited about that. Probably.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where are the core? If you could. Where are the main populations?
So we would say that our main population is really south of Highway 60 here in Missouri, and it's kind of spread across all of those southern counties. And so that's the real core. And
all the way over to the Mississippi River.
Probably not that far.
Like Poplar Bluff,
Poplar Bluff area. Yeah, I mean, and
from Joplin to Poplar Bluff.
Joplin's a little bit of a stretch, but
really, okay. So they're not going that far west.
There are some there, but again, talking about the core, it's definitely I'd say Springfield to there.
Yeah. And when you look at the map of kind of the forested areas of Missouri, when you look at kind of those southern counties, you can pick out those big blocks of forest, and it's those really connected patches. And so we say, primary range is south of Highway 44. And that's a really easy interstate for people to think about. It kind of cuts the state diagonally. Yeah. And then, recognizing that within that primary range, there's a lot of variability in terms of the density of bears and how many bear reports we get from certain counties and things like that. And then as you go north of that and closer to St. Louis, we kind of hit these expansion areas where it's year after year dispersing males showing up, and there's high quality habitat there, and it's connected, but it's also these areas that are surrounded by human populations. And so there's that kind of, education factor that goes into it. And in terms of our research, it's actually one of the things that we're looking at. So we estimate the population and monitor that population growth. We can look at the home ranges, and we know our bears are choosy and they're selecting the highest quality habitat and things like that. But we can think to the future, right? And we can look at, based on how bears use the landscape here and what habitat, components are important to them, what are some of the towns that are likely to have conflicts in the future? Yeah. And so, Josh deals a ton with the Branson area and, some of the suburbs of Springfield and in between the two. And this is, right around the core bear range, right? So it's not surprising. But then we can look down the road, and rather than it being
you can predict
reactive,
where they're
exactly.
show up.
And we've done a lot of corridor work, looking at like what are the most likely travel corridors that our bears would have, and then kind of identifying what are barriers to movement, and recognizing that maybe those barriers could use mitigation in the future if that's something that is a possibility,
like a interstate highway.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Or just maintaining that connectivity and looking at how we can keep that forest connected and stuff, so that we have that continued bear movement. But then also looking at how those corridors might funnel bears to certain areas where now it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, so you're doing some predictive work.
Yep.
They say the Ouachitas and Ozark bears are allopatric populations for the most part, because the Arkansas River and then I-40.
Right.
And I mean, for the most part, bears aren't crossing that much.
Right.
But I mean, so that's what you're talking about. It's like physical barriers that are dividing populations.
Right.
But yeah. No, that's fascinating. That's cool. Cool stuff. Well, we've gone a while here, and that's perfect. How long have we gone? Long time. Good.
Yeah. Wow.
Good. Josh is just he just loves to talk. No, I could talk to you for another 2 hours. I really could.
Yeah.
Closing comment.
I think it's an exciting time for bears in the state here. I mean, and just bears in general. If you're interested in bear management, regardless of what state you live in, it's an exciting time here. And I would say, just kind of keep an eye out. We're in this, phase of looking at that potential hunting season, thinking about how that might look. But also just with this growing and expanding population here, we're in a really active management that involves a whole lot of different things. It's not just hunting, it's not just education, it's not just nuisance issues. It's how all of those kind of combine into one cohesive management program. So I'd say keep an eye out and stay tuned. And then if anyone's interested in the research project, we do on the MDC webpage have a research page, and we have a bear story map that we have on there that we update once a year, and it's kind of a fun interactive way. So if folks haven't seen bear dens, we've got some really cool like bear den videos, and like a bear in a hollow tree, putting a GoPro in and looking at her from above and stuff like that, and then bears coming out of caves and everything. So I'd say check it out if there's any interest there.
What's it called? What's that website?
So you can just get to it at mdc.mo.gov/bears, and then there's a link to all of the research, all the management stuff, our management plan and everything. It's all right there.
Yeah, great. Perfect. And the potential hunt is just for residents as well.
That's right. Yeah. So
I think that's great. I just wanted to say that because, if somebody was like, oh, I can go to Missouri and hunt a bear.
Yeah.
It's for Missouri residents.
For Missouri residents only right now.
I think there should be perks for state residents.
Yep.
I really do.
We didn't talk about, as part of the plan, kind of the allotment with landowners versus general lottery either, did we?
Okay, I saw that.
Yeah, so that's a part of the proposal. So essentially allocating the first 10% of permits to landowners that have 20 contiguous acres within the bear management zone for which they're applying. So trying to get to where that we can encourage that landowner participation that way, and recognizing we're still talking about a limited hunting season right now.
Would part of that be some type of thing where they would have to report back at the end,
like
you do with waterfowl and stuff like that?
Yeah, so we will have a telecheck requirement for any harvested bears, and then there's been discussions about post-harvest surveys if the season were to move forward and things like that, and that's something that we do for a variety of other species. So looking at gaining that information for harvested bears, we would require a tooth so that we could get that age structure of the harvest and stuff. So
great. Shepherd, do you have any questions? None? No. You learned something, though, didn't you? What'd you learn?
Bears can go 450 miles.
450 miles. Okay. Yep. That's right. That one bear went that far. Yep. Great. Well, thank you guys.
Yeah, no problem.
And, Colby, thoughts?
Well,
Make it quick.
I have more questions.
You can start your own podcast and meet with them some other time.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess this would probably be a quick question, but what would be the thing that would help you guys with your research more, like with public interaction, or just if somebody wanted to help just biologists in their own state, what would be a way to think about how to interact with that?
I think if there's interest there, look to the website, see if there's any guidance there. I mean, one of the big things that we encourage the public to do is to report bear sightings. And so that's not something that every state does, especially states with, huge burgeoning populations and stuff. But for us here, that's a really critical component. And in some cases, it's that one sighting report that leads to us trapping on a property because there's a collared bear there, or because, they've got a female in an area where we'd like to collar a female and stuff like that. And so, I mean, I think I would say, you could reach out in that instance. And for me, I mean, I always get questions from the public about the project and interest, and find their email and send an email kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
Good. Well, keep the wild places wild, because that's where the bears live. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside, from grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.